Hello, Doug.
Hello again, Sean.
All right. So our topic today doesn't sound very, if you'd want to say sexy or interesting in the world of real estate, but it sure becomes a lot more interesting when you hear of the actual cases that happen, and we're talking about seller disclosure, seller property disclosure.
Yep. So in the state of Minnesota, anytime you transfer real estate for residential purposes, you need to, the seller needs to fill out a disclosure form, basically indicating anything that they know about the property that would affect a buyer's use and enjoyment of the property.
Okay. Yeah, we actually have the actual seller property disclosure forms here, just the first and last page, because the state of Minnesota has made them 9 pages long now, just for seller property disclosure, which gives you an idea of how important it must be that they're dedicating, and that's not even including well and septic.
Correct.
This is just the property disclosures. So certainly there are cases where you don't have to fill out property disclosures, like if you, like a bank.
Right.
A bank is not going to fill out property disclosures because they or nobody with the bank has ever lived in the property.
Correct. But a bank does have to fill out an alternative disclosure form, which is still 4 pages long.
Right.
Which basically says they don't know anything about the property.
Or if they do, then they have to disclose that. So even if you don't have to fill out the seller property disclosures because you've never lived there, it's a relative's house, whatever, if there's something that's a material fact that could adversely and significantly affect the buyer's use or enjoyment of the property, you still have to disclose it, even if you've never lived there. So
it's called full disclosure.
If you know there's a hole in the roof, if you know the basement leaks and fills up with an inch of water every time, then you got to disclose that even if you've never lived there.
Correct.
Okay.
So the main guideline I tell my sellers is that let's fill this out right away. Let's fill it out truthfully, accurately.
And they fill it out.
Yes, the seller has to fill it out. The real estate agent is not supposed to fill it out.
Right.
And then that is what is given to the buyer usually at the time of sale, which means the time a purchase agreement is going to be made or close thereafter.
Okay.
And then also, then it's a disclosure form. So it's just like if you are trying to sell a car, the new buyer, some cautious buyers will take your car to the mechanic and have him check everything over.
Right, and have a Carfax.
Right. And so, but it's not the same. Real estate's not quite the same. But it would be nice for the buyer to know things that you know about the house. Because we want to be truthful and accurate of what, and the buyer wants this too, because a buyer is trying to make a determinative valuation. And granted, if you have a major problem with the house that is going to affect your value of the property, because buyers don't want to, the buyers are going to have to fix it if it's fixable.
So Doug, let's move on to, there's the cut and dry ones, like we're discussing, but when we get to legal stuff like this, what really happens in any type of legal sense is there's all types of gray areas. Gray areas. So we have like tons of these examples. You were just talking about one about without naming names or making it where somebody could tell who you're talking about. You were talking about you're representing a buyer and what happened?
Oh, okay, sure. We made the offer. Everything was accepted based on the fact that there was
what did the disclosure say?
The 30-year-old home said that over the last 25 years of ownership, the owner had experienced only water problems in the basement 3 times. My buyer moves in and 3 weeks later has a water problem in the basement. So it was his feeling that maybe the seller disclosure form was not truthfully stated at how many times or how severe the water problem was when he did have the water problem.
Okay.
So, and this was 3 weeks after the buyer moved in. And so the seller was gone, thought everything was over and done with. So basically speaking, it could be an oddity that there's water in the basement from a really heavy rain or the conditions that were just right. But anyway, so we had to more or less renegotiate with the seller to correct the problem, and it was corrected. The seller did contribute a little bit of money to help.
So basically, the buyer. So just so everybody knows how that works, basically how this becomes an issue normally in this gray area. Normally it's the buyer moves in,
Yep.
And has a problem.
Yep.
It could be 3 weeks, it could be 3 months, or even 3 years, depending on, but it basically comes down to at the beginning of that, the issue is the buyer's opinion about what they think the seller did or didn't disclose properly.
Sure.
And because in the legal sense, anybody can sue anybody. So
there's two things going on. There's a seller side to fully disclose. Then you have the gray areas of, do I have to really disclose this? And so again, we're not attorneys. If you have a gray area, you can ask your real estate agent, but again, your real estate agent is not an attorney, so you might want to ask your attorney, do I or don't I have to disclose this? I don't think it's a material fact, blah, blah, blah. So you can check that out. Buyers, read it through carefully, right? And if you've got questions, now is the time to ask, not after you own the home, but before you own the home.
Right. Have an inspection.
Even before the inspection, ask the seller or the seller's agent, what does this mean? I want more clarification. And so you have a better understanding of what the seller's perception of the problems are.
And that's where a buyer's agent helps too, because a buyer's agent has seen dozens and probably more like you've seen probably thousands of these property disclosures, so you kind of know at least if somebody has written something to what kind of to ask.
Right. And also some things that sometimes I tell buyers or sellers that what should be on this report is maybe what the neighbors know. The seller, over the years that they've lived there, I'm sure the neighbors have seen them do stuff, or they've talked together, and gee, I've got this problem, and I'm going to fix it, or whatever. So, if you're the seller, you're thinking, well, gee, what if the buyer went and asked my good friend Joe, my neighbor, about my property, my house, and what is Joe going to tell him? So that probably should be on the form. Or buyers, maybe you do want to go ask the neighbors. I mean, doesn't hurt. Say, hey, I'm going to be your new neighbor, maybe. And is there anything I should know about the neighborhood of the house that might be good or of a concern to me? And you have to take, especially if the neighbor isn't getting along with the seller, you might have to take
take everything with a grain of salt, or even why they might not want you to live there.
Yeah. So, but I've had buyers that go do that.
And sometimes you even find out some negotiating things. So if you ever do that, you should share that with your agent.
Share that with your agent. But, there's nothing wrong with that. I was at a house a couple weeks ago, and the neighbor came out when we were looking at it with the buyer, and we were chatting, and a few things came out about their property that actually enhanced the value of the property in our eyes.
What was that?
It was about how the backyard looked, and it looked like, we had a backyard that was 100 feet by 200 feet or whatever it was, and actually the neighbor said, well, and this has gone both ways for me on this. It says, actually, where that tree line is back there, our property goes another 15 feet or whatever into the woods or something. Nobody wanted to cut down the tree. Oh, well, that's neat. That's, again, that's better buffer than what we thought we had, because it was never fully explained anywhere else.
But make sure that you find the survey stakes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes even the seller or the neighbors have ideas about where the property lines are.
But in another case, I was actually, I was there on another matter was a vacant home, and I was there and I was looking around the house, make sure everything was shut up and closed up tight, and the neighbor came over and says, well, where that fence line is, that's I allowed my neighbor to put the fence line over on my property because he had a dog and blah blah blah, and he said, whoever's going to own this, that's my fence now. It's not my neighbor. My neighbor's gone. He's moving. Now that's my fence. That was the agreement. So I would have never known that. The seller never told me that.
And now you got to disclose that as a licensed agent.
So that was good. So I had to make a note of that so that any potential buyer would know that.
Okay. So we covered there in terms of, getting disclosure or asking neighbors and stuff. What else is kind of a rule of thumb for what you should or shouldn't disclose when you're trying to sell your house? Was there any other rules of thumb? Because you and I discussed another one before we shot this video. Well, that I had suggested, which was, would you want to know about that when you moved into the house? Because if it's an issue that hopefully most sellers have taken care of most issues, they've solved most of the issues before they put the home on the market.
Right.
Like for example, water. Or another one that I was talking about is bats. Right. So you had bats in the attic. You had an exterminator over pest control. They got rid of all the bats, sealed up. You had everything sealed up so no more bats could get in your house, because who wants bats in their house?
Right.
And now you don't disclose it. and then the new owner moves in, and 3 months later they've got bats again.
Yeah. So would have been better off to disclose it, right?
Right. Yeah, you should. And so that's maybe a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
That you could use too when filling this out.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, what would I want to know? And the question I always have if somebody asks me, do I really have to disclose that? And I'd say, well, why is it that you don't want to disclose that? Is it because you think somebody wouldn't buy the house? Because then you probably should disclose that. Yeah. And you should probably describe the remedy that you've taken in the result.
Yep.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb.
Okay.
I think that's great. And also on the back page of the disclosure, it does tell us in a few cases of what you do not need to disclose. And for example, in the state of Minnesota, you don't have to disclose if the house has been occupied or owned by somebody that was suspected to be infected with HIV virus or diagnosed with acquired
immunodeficiency.
Yeah, immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. And then also, the seller does not have to disclose if the site was at any time involved in a suicide, a natural death, or even perceived as having paranormal activity, which I think is kind of an interesting thing why that one showed up.
Well, these all showed up normally because of actual legal cases. Where like the buyer didn't disclose that they thought there were ghosts in the house, and then the new owners moved in, and they thought there were ghosts in the house, and so they sued the previous owners. And
right. And one of the other duty you do not have to disclose as a seller if the house is located in an area where there might be a neighborhood, your neighborhood is containing an adult family home or a community-based residential facility, things like that.
So and predatory offenders was the big one that you never disclose. You call the state of Minnesota.
Right. Predatory offenders aren't you.
Sexual predatory offenders.
And that's completely by the state of Minnesota and registering those people, and that there's a website and everything people can go to find out about that information. Okay. So basically, do a good job on disclosing fairly and accurately according to what the description, the directions of the disclosure form says, and do your best job there. Buyers, read it over, make sure you understand everything. If you have questions, make sure you find out and get more detail if there's things that you don't understand, because the last thing you want is have a misunderstanding after you've moved in. So let's try to clear everything up before everybody signs on the dotted line, and then everything will go a lot smoother for everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. Okay. Thanks for your advice there.
You bet, Sean.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.